Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. Let's talk a little bit about discernment. Discernment is such an important part of healing. It's such an important part of surviving. It's such an important part of avoiding these relationships. And again, just a little gentle reminder, it is September, which again, there's a goodbye to summer and a welcome to fall. We're having a special on my healing program, Discernment's Important to Healing, 25% off the first month. And if you're interested, please check out the video notes and you can get more information. But let's talk a little bit about discernment, and more specifically, because it's such an important tool, let's talk about people being shamed for being discerning. The most central tool to protecting yourself from a narcissistic relationship, and yet you're shamed for it. Let's break that down. So, things that survivors will sometimes say to themselves, especially after they've been through it and learned a little bit about narcissism. They may say, I'm being too fussy, or it's not realistic for me to expect so much of other people, or if I keep being this choosy, I'm going to end up alone. Discernment is one of the key tools in managing narcissism in your life. If done correctly, it can be a brilliant tool to keep them at bay. Not let them in too far, set boundaries, and cut your losses early. It's a tough tool, especially if you are empathic, because for reasons of things like cognitive dissonance, socialization, a history of trauma bonding, and invalidating relationships, the tendency is to make excuses when you meet a narcissistic person early on, and even, honestly, after you know them for a while. But it's not that simple. What's even worse is that other people may shame you for being discerning. They may tell you that you're being too fussy, that you can't expect so much of people, or that if you keep doing this, you're going to end up being alone. Or they will even get in a dig like, oh, so you're so perfect, huh? So in essence, you get shamed for noticing red flags and wanting to disconnect, set boundaries, or distance. Now, I find that discernment, something I preach, is great in theory, but it can get quite thorny in practice. I myself have had lots of problems with it. I'll meet someone, they'll seem toxic, I'll distance, and then people have said to me everything from, Ramani, you're not a team player, to you have to give people a chance, to even when I don't say one thing, all I do is distance. Oh, Ramani, you think everyone's a narcissist, don't you? Yes, and they say it in that voice. Now that narcissism survival is a primary focus of my work, I've stopped caring what people say and think. But back in the day when those voices mattered to me, I would think to myself, sometimes on a bad day I still do, I'm a horrible person. I'm a witch. Maybe I'm the narcissist for taking this stand of discernment. And this negative messaging was mirrored by the numerous trauma-bonded relationships that I've had. But if you are going to be discerning, sadly, in some ways you've got to sort of tolerate the shaming, which means developing some pretty thick psychological calluses. So when people tell you that you're being fussy or that you're going to die alone, then you have to do some second-level discernment and ask yourself if the people issuing you those criticisms, if they're enablers, and you got to erect some boundaries around them too. There are some tricks to discernment, though. It's really hard to cancel the script inside your head that you are the one being difficult by being discerning. That's the work of slowly addressing trauma-bonded patterns, not confusing empathy with enduring abuse. That's not easy work. Now, when it comes to other people, one place to start is to not tell other people that you're doing this kind of discernment initially. Just bow out, distance, set a boundary, perhaps acknowledge that you're busy or don't have the time. Because when you share red flag detection and discernment with other people, they can be judgy. I think the idea of discernment may make people nervous because they are concerned that they could be flagged as a sort of a red flag person. And my advice to anyone, and the simplest advice is literally the simplest advice in the world is don't be an asshole. Like if everyone remembered that, a hell of a world. Also, what can be helpful is to look back at some situations when you were discerning, but still were able to know how that person was behaving in various situations. So then you could see that those red flags you detected early, those things that left you feeling uncomfortable, were a thing. In one of my more recent experiences of this in my life, it became apparent that someone I had met very, very quickly was toxic inside of 3 minutes of meeting him. He was absolutely awful. And I was viewed as a not nice person for avoiding him. I never even said anything about him. I just avoided him. I wouldn't work in small groups with him. I wouldn't even want to be seated next to him at dinner. His behavior was always awful. But everyone kept saying that no matter how different we are, we can all work together, kumbaya nonsense. It became a battle of tolerating the idea that I was being viewed as a difficult person, but this person really was. Then that toxic person, after a few years, emboldened by everyone cutting him a wide berth, did a really bad thing. It caused all kinds of problems. It wasn't even that it felt good that I was right, maybe a little bit, but the issue did hurt people, but it really taught me how difficult discernment is. I just had to be resolute and tolerate being unpopular. Whether we do discernment quietly and then shame ourselves, I'm fussy, I'm being uppity, or others shame us, who do you think you are, glass houses, all of that. The best tool, discernment, is one of the most difficult to use. But that doesn't mean you can't use it. Use discernment quietly. Again, reflect on that tiger's cage metaphor I've shared. If you have to test the waters by walking into the cage, you may get shredded up a bit, but then at least you tested the hypothesis, and it kind of confirms that you were right in your instincts. Discernment doesn't mean that you have to turn on your heel and walk away. It doesn't mean that you have to share with others that you think this new person is toxic. It means trusting yourself for a minute, moving slowly, taking a minute, setting boundaries, and not waiting for other people to sign off on your decision. Many survivors of narcissistic abuse, so many survivors, have been gaslighted for so long and infused with a false narrative about themselves. You're the one who is the problem, right? That when people tell you that you're the one with the problem, you start to tend to believe them. If we wait for everyone to sign off on our choices around disengaging a little, setting boundaries, stepping away, then I have to tell you, none of us are ever going to get out of these relationships. You're never going to get full consensus. If you are more discerning, I can promise you, you're probably not going to be popular, but you'll definitely be happier. Thanks again.